Does a diagnosis guarantee SEN support? For whether that's when you are requesting for additional support in the classroom, or trying to get your child into a specialist independent school, or just hoping that there's a level of understanding and respect for the individual needs of your child who is just trying to engage in their learning. And despite sharing your concerns for your child's individual needs to be recognised, there is just no response. Maybe you are a parent like myself, raising a young person living with autism or ADHD, and ensuring that they have the best tools and strategies to engage in their education is essential. But there just seems to be this one thing that they need before even being considered as worthy of accessing it, and that is a diagnosis. So does a diagnosis guarantee special educational needs support? So in this video, I'm going to talk about whether seeking a diagnosis increases a child's chances to succeed in their education. I will discuss those setbacks that can make us question otherwise, and also discuss why we as parents need to stay empowered in order to advocate for our children's needs to be recognised as a result. My name is Brenda and I'm a parent mentor and a fellow parent. I support parents raising children with individual needs and differences to stay empowered whilst they navigate through procedural challenges. I have questioned myself many times on this journey as to whether as a parent there is a need to fight harder, or does a child's individual needs and differences need to be backed up by a diagnosis before they would be considered as requiring support? So let's talk about diagnosis. There seems to be this shift from going under the radar to being completely everywhere. There's a growing trend of people seeking a diagnosis, such as autism and ADHD, from celebrities to influential people in the public domain, as well as medical professionals and government officials also highlighting this prevalence. There's this mass awareness of ADHD and autism and how it impacts individuals on a day-to-day basis, in a way that seems to be spreading like wildfire, where acquiring a diagnosis has gone from, oh, that's interesting, to now what would be deemed as a must-have. Yes, there was autism and ADHD in the past. I recall when I was at school that there were a few people in the classroom that perhaps needed some one-to-one support. And even when my son was first diagnosed, it did feel like an isolating experience, something that I would have to go online to see what other parents were experiencing. And there seems to be a steady growth. And there's this influx of children seeking a diagnosis and having to experience these long, hefty delays and waiting lists to access the right support. But what happens when there's a large number of children acquiring a diagnosis, and there is so much awareness about conditions such as autism and ADHD and its challenges, yet where is the support? To me, it just seems very disproportionate. So let's discuss the subject of support. A diagnosis does not entitle a child to support in the classroom in the form of an EHCP. Yet, it is possible to have an EHCP without a diagnosis. But in cases where admissions into a specialist independent school that has enhanced provisions will normally be reserved for children that are in receipt of an EHCP. But to apply for support, those who oversee the EHCP will need to have identified likely special educational needs. And in many cases, a diagnosis would be underway when an EHCP is being applied for. So what makes it difficult to access support without a diagnosis? And the first thing is waiting lists. Waiting lists for an ADHD or an autism diagnosis seems to have significantly increased nationally, creating further delays for when a child can be assessed via the health service within the UK. And the second thing is a lack of collaboration. The school decides what special educational needs support a child can have, and this works best when there is a working collaboration with parents and the child around this. Typically, schools will conduct their own assessments to determine the level of support a child requires. This means that even if a child has a diagnosis, the school may still need to evaluate how the diagnosis impacts their learning in the classroom. In situations where the communication may have broke down with perhaps the school teacher, the SENCO or the local authority, this will often lead to perhaps a lack of engagement, or others not engaging with us parents, which will naturally result in an ineffective use of time, which could be utilised to identify the special educational needs support of the child. And the third thing is the use of bias and othering. Many parents, including myself, have found it hard to have their child's needs acknowledged as a way that their child functions rather than a manifestation of disruptive behaviour. A child could be misunderstood, labelled or blamed, if not represented, leaving parents feeling the need to fight harder for their child's views, wishes and feelings to be heard, so that they're not left at a disadvantage. So in situations like these three predicaments, being in a position to represent your child's challenges and abilities, when external factors like these are keeping you in a disempowered state, it can seem like the best case scenario would be for your child to obtain a diagnosis. In my experience, a diagnosis allowed me to advocate and communicate with clarity and intention, which allows others to understand my son's challenges from multiple perspectives in order for teachers and professionals to apply these perspectives whilst my son was at school. And for me, it freed others from using bias towards, well, they thought who my son was. But even saying that, it wasn't the case all the time. So why do we as parents need to stay empowered to advocate for our children as a result? It's important that any educational needs are identified as early as possible so that they can start receiving the support that they need. A diagnosis is not the solution to ensure that your child gets the support that they need, and to just have a child's challenges acknowledged as a label is not the solution. Access to support, services and provisions is the solution. A solution to receiving the right support at the right time and in the right place. This is where our role as parents come into play. And as a parent mentor, I'm here to support you to stay empowered. So I hope you found this information helpful, but if you're dealing with situations where perhaps you're trying to navigate procedural challenges whilst your child is at school, why not take a look at this playlist? Or if you're having challenges dealing with special educational needs professionals where you're finding it difficult to be on the same hymn sheet, why not take a look at this video? But for now, keep doing what you're doing, stay focused, stay empowered and keep creating progress. Thank you for listening.